morning, everyone. I can't remember the last time I actually gave an address at the Society sometime last year. It's nice to be up here again. So let me begin. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes. With that, I go home. I thought that since the Pope could come to the United States and struggle with English, I could begin by struggling with Latin. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes. It means, who will guard the guardians? And this is not a new concern. This is written by Juvenal, 1st century Roman poet and satirist. And what he was satirizing was the concern that men had for the virtue of their wives. And they were going to guard their wives, guard their virtue. And he raised the question, well, who's going to guard the guardians? All women are virtuous as long as all the men are. Right? So that was his question. So who's going to guard the guardians? Since then, it's been extended to include concern of who is going to supervise or look over, make sure that that authority figures do the right thing. It's been applied to kings, it's been applied to presidents, it's been applied, I think, recently to the police, the military. Who will guard the guardians? Now, in 1966, which was the year before I came to the ethical movement, the Algernon Black, who was the most prominent leader in the ethical movement's history, I think, aside from the founder, Felix Adler. In 1966, Algernon Black, because of his prominence in New York City, was appointed to be the chair of the New York City Civilian Police Review Board. And I wasn't in the country in 1966. I was with Lynn in the Peace Corps in East Africa. So I only read about this and get it from people who were involved in it. But I wasn't here at the time. But for those of you who might recall, 1966 in New York and the Civilian Police Review Board, this was headline stories, day after day, and a lot of it was very critical of the Civilian Police Review Board. It was one of the two factors that really sunk the mayoralty of John Lindsay, the other one the snowstorm and not cleaning up. But the other was the Civilian Police Review Board. And Algernon Black was the flashpoint. Algernon Black, who was accused of being left-wing, socialist, communist, anti-cop. Nothing to do with that. That was the end of the Civilian Review Board. Too much political pressure. Then in the night, and I knew Black, Al, and had spoken to him a little bit about it. He wrote a book called The Police and the Community, I think is what it was called. Then sometime in the 1980s, I was concerned with this question, who's going to guard the guardians? And I had the opportunity to meet the chief of police here in Nassau County, and was chatting with him, off the record, informally, and had thought about the possibility of having something like the Civilian Police Review Board here in Nassau County. Immediately dismissed, no discussion whatsoever. It was a dismissive kind of laugh. I mean, you really are serious about this? That suggestion did not go anywhere. Now, of course, last year we all know that once again, matters of community police relations have surfaced all around the United States. We could all make a list that we have in our heads of this. And I was thinking, well, there were riots here in Long Island that you might remember in the late 1960s. Because conditions were awful in Long Island? No. Could they be better? Absolutely. So I'm thinking that we haven't had this kind of problem with police-community relations here on Long Island. The relations generally are good. Could they be improved? Of course. How do you prevent policemen overstepping the line, where clearly what they're doing is a violation, probably ultimately, of the law itself? And I'm thinking of what has been presented by police forces as one of the major reasons why crime rates in this country have fallen so precipitously. And the theory that is offered by many police, and they're backing away a little bit from it, but I think that the theory has a great deal of validity to it. It's really common sense. which is if you start with the things which are small, then you prevent the things from becoming big and out of hand. In other words, if you deal with the bullies in school, you're less likely to have people who are going to wind up as being bullies and criminals when they're adults. It's very simple. If you put a stop to people putting graffiti on the walls on the sides of buildings, and you tell them that's not acceptable, we're going to stop it, you send a message which is, doing things which are not right, uncivil, illegal, are not going to be tolerated, even if they're small. The message is then, we're not going to tolerate the stuff which is big. So I'm thinking, why can't that same theory then be applied to the police departments? That is, if you were to pay attention to the small infractions that police engage in, won't that lead to the prevention, and of course we'll never know it's true because it's the proving the negative, but wouldn't that lead to the prevention of cops who may think, I can get away with this because I've gotten away with smaller things. So that was the idea. It's called the broken windows theory. Put a stop to people breaking windows, you'll put a stop to people murdering people on the streets. Is that the reason why the crime rate has fallen so dramatically in the last 20 years? It's often been presented as certainly a significant reason. So I'm thinking, let's take that theory and see if it can be applied to the police force itself. So with that thought in mind, I wrote a letter to the police commissioner here in Nassau County and expressing this point of view. What can we do to prevent the small stuff? To my surprise, got a call back, an email back within a week or two from the commissioner saying, why don't you come in and let's discuss this? So put together an ad hoc committee that was David Harmon and Sylvia Silberger. And the three of us went and we met with the police commissioner. And in that meeting was also the person, the police lieutenant, I guess he was, who was in charge of community relations, the person who was in charge essentially of public relations. So there were three of them, three of us. And the meeting, which I thought would probably be about 20 minutes, nice from hearing from you, turned out to be probably closer to a 2-hour meeting. Someplace in that meeting, the police commissioner mentions that there is a civilian police academy on Long Island. Also mentions in that meeting that the police department here in Nassau puts a great deal of emphasis upon ethics in their training of new police officers. So I asked for two things. I said, can you please send me what it is that you do with the rookies in terms of your ethics training? And the other was, he then said, well, would one of you like to go to the Civilian Police Academy? When we said, oh, that's an interesting thing. Tell us more about it. He says, well, you want to go? And I immediately raised my hand, as I do for all of these very interesting things. I said, yes, I'd like to go. Sylvia and David also were interested. Neither could really work it out for just in terms of their schedule. So that is how I wound up going to the Civilian Police Academy, which I never heard of before. It's been around for a while. It was discontinued for some period, I guess a couple of years or so. And it was just reinstituted, so I went to the first of the new classes. This is a 15-week-long program that meets one night a week for 3 hours. And lots of interesting things are presented at Civilian Police Academy. There were probably about 40 to 50 people who were students at this program. And if I were to give you a profile of who these people were, some ex-cops, some security guards that were interested in learning more about how they could do their job more effectively or possibly even becoming a police cadet. There were 3 people from the media, a number of clergy, most community activists, social activists of one sort or another, and me, kind of fit in a number of different places here. And also I would say that probably a handful, half a dozen or so, people I would call police wannabes. They just are in love with the police. If these were rock stars, these were people who would be following the rock stars around. They just loved them. So they were there for this. And during the 15 weeks, the programs were mainly educational. This is what the police do. Here are the laws that govern us. Here's why we do what it is that we do. Here's some of the equipment that we use. So they flew in a helicopter. They brought in the emergency trucks. We could walk around, talk to the people who fly the helicopters. Well, here, this is what they do. This is why they do it. Go onto the emergency truck. Put on the equipment that people do put on when they go into, emergency situations. So I went because I'm interested in challenges. Anything that sort of is out of my routine, I look forward to. I enjoy doing that. I thought it was interesting. I was curious. I also thought it was valuable. These are the same reasons why 4 years ago I went to Claflin University as the exchange professor at Hofstra, an historical black university. When is my opportunity to do such a thing? This is really, really interesting. The worst that could happen is I don't like it. In this case, it's 15 weeks long on a Thursday night, and I discovered soon after, in 3-4 weeks, there were a number of people who didn't like it. Just stopped coming. There was no compulsion to be there. I attended, I think, every one of the sessions except one where I had a conflict. So I learned a lot. I learned what it is that the police think is important, how they view themselves, how they view their work, and also what they think needs to be done to continue to work on community police relationships. Now, I enter into this as a self-described progressive. I've always been on, I would suppose, what we describe as maybe the left side of politics, on left side of social movements. And I could tell you, since I travel a lot in those circles, that progressives, I would say, are instinctively anti-cop. Don't like them. And I'm thinking about my own experience with the police. I really have only had, as a child, only 2 experiences with the police. One is I was a teenager during the summer, and the way we would get down to Rockaway Beach, down Woodhaven Boulevard and Cross Bay Boulevard was to hitch. So we hitched all summer long. Until there was one time that we were usually about 5 of us, and we would spread out, and first car that would stop, we'd say, "We have friends who also need a ride up. Can you give us a ride?" So they, this time, we stop a car, hitch, car stops, get into the car, 2 guys sitting in the front, and then they say, "Do you have any friends who want to ride?" We say, "Sure." They pull up, and they got 2 or 3 more of my friends come in. And they go a half a block, and they pull over, and they were cops, undercover, and said, hitchhiking is illegal. You guys better not do this again. Well, I can tell you that was the last time that we hitchhiked. The other was an experience about the same age when I was called down to the police station because they wanted to interview me, and I remember my father went with me. This came about because there was somebody in this apartment complex that I lived in who was shooting a BB gun at me and other people on the street. And I complained about this to the police. So the police called me down. I thought to get more information about who this person was. And that wasn't what it was. It was, "Who are you? We're taking your name. You're causing problems in this community. We're putting your name on file, and it will stay buried if you don't get into trouble until you're 18 years old." Why did this happen? Turned out that the person who had the rifle and was shooting was the son of a fire lieutenant. So not only was it the blue wall of science, but there was also the blue and I don't know what the firefighters says, let's call it red. It was the blue and red wall of silence here. It was now turned on me. What an interesting and odd experience. One of the things that's led me to champion the causes of social justice and the people who are not served properly by society. So why are progressives instinctively anti-cop? Not all, of course. It is because if you think of what it means to be a progressive, it means that you want to change things. That is, that there's something that you see wanting in the status quo. You want to make things better. You want to get rid of things that are bad. You want to take the things that are good and make them even better. Introduce things that aren't already there. That is, as a progressive, you're on the side of change. On the side of the underdog. The police, on the other hand, are charged with maintaining law and order. What does that mean? That means that you're not out there to change things. What you're doing is actually maintaining things. You want to make sure that the law as it is enforced. You're not on the side of people who are challenging the law, just the opposite. Your work, and rightly so, is to be on the side of maintaining the status quo. Can you imagine if the police didn't do that? If the police then decided on their own, whatever their political interests were, that that's what was going to be enforced and nothing else? We have laws in a democratic society that should reflect our values, and if they don't, we work to change the laws. But as long as the laws are what the laws are, the police's job is to enforce the law. Whereas a progressive's job, if you'd like, is to challenge the law to make it better. So, not surprised that one of my very good friends, who is very much of a social activist, when I told him I was involved in the Civilian Police Academy, he says to me, I got to tell you, I hate cops. Wow. Adamant about this. Really, there was no discussion. There was no place to connect with him on this one about, well, what do we do about a situation that we think needs to be addressed? His was simply, I hate cops. So if you start with the attitude, I hate you who you are, how in the world can you form a relationship that needs to be mutual so people can understand one another? It simply won't happen, I don't think. So some of the things that I learned in the police academy, I already knew. Much of it wasn't a surprise. Some of the things were interesting. I've never gotten close to a police helicopter before. I've never put on a vest, to a bulletproof vest, et cetera, that sort of thing. Now, one of the things that I knew but was reinforced by going to the police academy was just as progressives are instinctively anti-cop, police are instinctively conservative. Much of it for the reason that I just mentioned. The main function is to preserve law and order. It is to enforce the status quo. But there are also other reasons why the police are instinctively what we think of as being conservative. The police are protectors. In Nassau County, they added something else, which I think is right, which is that they're here to serve the public, to serve the community. So it's not simply to protect, but it's also to serve. These are guardians. Who is to guard the guardians? The police are guardians. Well, we also have other guardians, the military. The military's role is very different than the police. The military are to defend, and they are trained to be killers. We don't like to think of that. That's where our tax money goes, and unless you're a pacifist, think about it. This is what we're supporting, I think for a good reason. I don't know how many people here, aside from Ken, was in the Army. Maybe several others have been in the military. I was, and the first thing that you are told when you enter basic training, at least when I was in basic training, was, yesterday you were a civilian, 4 weeks from now, you're going to be a killer. Who doesn't want the military to be killers? You need to kill when you're called upon to kill. And I learned how to kill. That's not what we want the police to be. The police aren't killers. The police are guardians. And there's a very big difference between a killer and a guardian. What I discovered, somewhat to my surprise, is at least the people who are doing the training have a view of society that while they're defenders of the status quo, also recognize that there are underlying social problems which often are the cause of the things that they are called upon to deal with. So there was often talk there about the need for better education, the need to create more jobs in our society, the need to create better jobs, better paying jobs in our society. How that gets played out politically, I'm not sure. But the idea was that, yes, there are underlying social reasons why we wind up with some of the problems that we have on the street. And really, if you want the police to really make society better, you're looking in the wrong place. It really is with teachers. It really is with people who are job creators. That needs to happen. And then we can, what we do is we'll be different. What I found is that most of the cops that I met, I would actually say probably without exception, the ones that I met, had a chance to chat with during the breaks that we had elsewhere. I've met with one of the high-ranking brass for lunch, and again, I was surprised, 2-hour lunch. He was not eager to get back, but just wanted to talk. I found that these are decent, caring, and concerned people. Now, one of the things that was interesting for me was one of the things I experienced in what I call cop camp. I'm not sure if the police would be offended by this, but it's what I call cop camp. One of the things was they had an active shooter demonstration. That is, we had all the instructions about what you're supposed to do when there's an active shooter. That is, if somebody's in the mall, somebody's in the school, that's what an active shooter is. Somebody walks into a church. That's the active shooter. There's somebody there who has a gun, seems obvious that what they want to do is kill people. So what we had was a lecture, and then they gave us mock pistols, kinds that the police have, and they told us again what to do. We ran through a dry run through the halls of the school that we were meeting at, and then it wasn't such a dry run. Then they told us there's going to be an active shooter here. And as we're going through the hall, somebody jumps out of this darkened hall with a gun that flashes, makes lots of noise. And it was the experience that I had when I was in the military, when we were going on night maneuvers, which is, we had lectures all day long about what to do in night maneuvers, which is, when you hear an explosion, stay where you are. Don't move until you can figure out what's going on. We're in the hall. Oh, I'll tell you what happens on the night maneuvers. Of course, we're out in the middle of the night in the Pine Barrens in Fort Dix. An explosion goes off. Every one of us ran as fast as we could in every direction. It's one thing to hear it, to know it intellectually. It's another to experience it. And I could tell you that I wasn't so thrown by this, even though my military training, in quotes, was like 50 years ago almost. I had a different reaction to those people who had not experienced this before. They just were absolutely scared out of their wits, and really most of them couldn't function. Just forgot everything that they learned. So how do you deal with these sort of things? It requires you being exposed to it over and over again. That is, it requires real training. The other thing was a ride around in a cop car at night. This was arranged for all of us who were in the program. I went with one other person, and the cop was driving us around at night. And I asked if it could be in my community, which is the 3rd precinct, which covers lots of nice neighborhoods, but it also covers Newcastle, which is one of the higher crime rates areas in Nassau County. I wanted to see what was it like to be a cop riding around at night in my neighborhood. So I rode around with them. Now, here's the analogy that I came up with. Just as it's the nature of the media, which police don't like, because the cops say that the media never gets it right. They're always misreporting things. It's always a distortion. It's always the cops are bad, okay? I think that's all wrong. I think the media, by and large, does a good job, at least Newsday and other reputable papers. Not a perfect job, but a good job. Just as it is in the very nature of the media to report bad news. Who cares? I mean, can you imagine the headline says, there were no bombings in Nassau County last night. As the headline? No, the headline would have to be news, something which is out of the ordinary, and most of the time, bad. That is what interests us. After all, it has to. We need to protect ourselves. We need to know what's going on. We need to know what's safe and what's not safe. That's the role of the media, is to report bad news. It's the nature of police work. I find very clearly, riding around at night in the police car. It is in the very nature of police work to make you wary, to give you a jaundiced view of human nature, sometimes cynical, as you're always on the lookout for trouble. Why is that person there? Are they up to doing a bad thing? You may very well encounter violence before the night is over. You see dysfunction in a way that most of us don't see on an ongoing basis. It is often work that is in a place like running down a hall that you've never been in before, or a street that is dark. Often it is work that is done alone, and the major cause of incidences of police dying on the job is complacency. They're not careful enough, and they do things that are absolutely foolish that they had learned that they shouldn't do when they were in the police academy. They take too much for granted. Some things about Nassau County Police you may not know. It is the 13th largest police department in the United States. And in my view, it is highly professional, run by a bunch of very smart people, dedicated trainers, and this is all a reflection of the top people that I have met in the police department. Now, here is, I would think that one of the most important things I learned was the first or second time that I attended one of these meetings. I get there early, as I tend to do. I hate being late any place. So I get places early, hang around with people who are there, and the person who's in charge of this whole program, the police officer who's in charge of the whole thing, he's there. He now introduces me to another cop, and I sort of had, I walked through the building that I shouldn't have done. It was off limits, except if you had reason to be there. I didn't know that. I didn't see the sign. So the cop who was in charge of the building sort of calls me over and is telling, "What are you doing?" The person who's in charge of the police academy says to this cop, he says, "It's okay. He's one of us now." Interesting. What does that mean to say that you're now one of us? I have special privileges. I shouldn't be treated like an ordinary person, but extend it even further. What does this mean to say I'm one of us when we're looking at the collectivity that we call the police force? I am now part of the family. That was stated again publicly, which is that when you finish this program after 15 weeks and you receive your certificate and you go to the graduation program, you will now be part of the family. What's it mean to be part of a family? To be part of a family means that you stand up for one another. When somebody in your family gets in trouble, you stand behind them. Who's better to watch your back than your family? So what is the blue wall of silence that we know about in the police? What is the band of brothers that we know about with soldiers, other than people feeling so close to one another that they see each other as family? Not a bad thing. To be able to count on those people when you're in a dangerous situation, who are going to risk their lives in order to save yours, is what you want. But there's also a negative side to all of this. The negative side is that as a family, we then view all those people who aren't part of the family as strangers, as others. We give the benefit of the doubt to the people who are members of our family, and we don't give the benefit of the doubt to those people who aren't part of our family. I know when Ann Clayson was here, I think last year, part of her talk, and I think most of us found it the part that was most interesting, when she was talking about implicit biases. That is, that all of us, no matter how objective we think we are, really have biases that are implicit. If you ask people what do you think about so-and-so and so-and-so, we will all come up here, we're not prejudiced. In fact, when you do tests in a different way, we don't have time to think about it. Almost all of us wind up as having biases against certain people. Just give you a quick example. Before the collapse of the economy a number of years ago, one of the tests that was done about implicit biases had to do with who got mortgages. So what you did is you went out and you had testers. These two testers had identical sheets in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of their education, in terms of where they live, in terms of their income, in terms of their credit history, blah, blah, blah. What happens? If a white couple goes to a mortgage person who's giving the mortgage, they tend to get the mortgage. You have black couples who go to a white mortgage person who's issuing the mortgage, they tend not to get the mortgage. Same thing. In both instances, should I give them the mortgage, not give them the mortgage? Yeah, I'll give them the mortgage. Why? Because they like me. In other words, I understand them. Don't give it to the people who are not like me. Why? I'm not so sure. You know what? I don't know much about these people. I'm not going to take a chance. So we're skeptical about those people who aren't like us. We give the benefit of the doubt to the people who are like us. So if the police see themselves as a family, By definition, those people who are not part of the police are not my family. In other words, I give the benefit of the doubt to other policemen. I don't give the benefit of the doubt to those people who aren't part of this family. That is, you're not policemen. You're not prosecutors. You're not part of the justice system. The police, having said this, the police recognize that they are most effective when they police their communities with the collaboration and the authority of the people that they do serve. We go until 12 o'clock? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Linda. But they don't. When was the last time you saw a cop walking the beat in Nassau County? They don't do this. Also, the stress upon ethics that they talk about in the police academy. This is, what does it mean? As I gather it, it is ethics through discipline. That is, know what the rules are, we will enforce the rules, that's all you need to do. That's not how I teach ethics. I think that ethics is much more important than simply learning what the rules are and enforcing the rules. It has to do with judgment and compassion as well. One of the things that is a problem, both good and bad, it's a good thing, it's not a problem, the bad thing is a problem. They are getting many more highly qualified recruits for Nassau County Police Department. The recruits are coming from the military. Just remember the distinction I make between guardians and warriors. Highly professional, well-educated. They know what they're doing. But can you make the switch of the mentality from a warrior to a guardian? It's a big problem, I think. No one else has recognized this. No one else has acknowledged it. I think so. The very first meeting that we had at the police academy, they had all the cadets introduced to us, and the way that we were introduced to us is they march, like this, into the room. Very disciplined. Yes, sir, no, sir, hands at the side. That's how the military get trained. Okay, what can be done? Some of these things are structural. There are budget reallocations that are needed. That is, the police have plenty of money. Probably is not going in the right places. And one of the reasons it's not going in the right places is because there are all kinds of contract restrictions about what can be done. How do you change contract restrictions? The people doing the negotiating need to have a stronger hand in that negotiation. How do the politicians get a stronger hand? If there's a support from the community for different kinds of policing. In other words, it really, in a democracy, comes back to us. I think that the police know what needs to be done. I think that the officer, the brass, the top police want to do it, and their hands are tied. The other major problem I see is a particular piece of legislation known as 50A. It's New York Civil Rights Law, which is that this particular law, which applies to all people who are public employees, singles out law enforcement as the exception, which is that the police enforcement personnel records are not subject to public scrutiny. So you don't know that these cops may have been disciplined 12 times, 27 times, 150 times, or never. You can't get those records. They're sealed. In other words, it's the police themselves who will do their own internal investigations, and we, the public, have to hope that the people who are doing the investigating are going to be honest in those investigations. That has changed slightly in Nassau County. There are now, the police do investigate every use of physical force, and one of those people on that group of, I think, 5, should be a civilian. It's not a civilian police review board, but it seems to be moving somewhat in that direction. So police are concerned about how do you get closer to police-community relations, and one of the things they say, we have to educate the community not to get over this culture of not snitching. If you don't know this, in a lot of minority communities, there's a culture of you don't snitch. No matter how bad things are, even if you know who the people are who are criminals, even if you're afraid to walk on your streets and you know those very people who are intimidating you, you don't snitch. Why don't you snitch? Why did the police have a blue wall of silence? It's no different. When you have a mentality of us and them, we protect ourselves. The police protect themselves. The community protects itself. As long as you both see the other as the other. There is a lack of trust in a number of communities in Long Island. Probably not amongst most of us who sit in this room. Most of our encounters with the police have probably been on the positive side. Listen to the people from communities of color. Some of them say, I'm more afraid of the police than I am about the drug dealer on the corner. An exaggeration? Probably. Is there truth in it? Some small measure of truth. But listen to the thing that's being said. How do you address that? So, I have more thoughts about this, but let me say that I think that this kind of a talk requires that we take some action. So we have a letter writing table in the back. And this letter writing table is addressing New York State Legislature, which is, according to Amnesty International, there is not a single police force anywhere in the United States that has as its standard for the use of physical force the international standard that has been adopted by many, many countries around the world. This letter is very simple. You don't need to go into the details of it. I have several samples back there. It is to call upon your local legislator to change the laws so that the laws which govern the use of physical force at least conform to the international standard. That is what I want to say about this. I guess my closing comments would be lots of notes I didn't get to. Just as Al Black had started the work a half a century ago about improving police-community relations, let's pick up that work. Let's move forward with all that we've learned since then, so that when we read about the tensions between police and communities in the future, those incidences will be so rare that we will truly be shocked and can say, what more can we do?
Thank you all.
I think we should turn this off. Hope it works.